Well, hello everyone. Greetings. As you know, the International Association of University Presidents is a global network of university leaders dedicated to making the world a better place through higher education, strengthening leadership, and the exchange of knowledge, best practices, strategic insights. And that is why, on behalf of Dr. Fernando León Garcia, IAUP President, I am happy to welcome you to this, our second seminar on mental health, the second out of three, which in partnership with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, we proudly announced a few weeks ago. That being said, allow me to introduce Emily Vicarum, who will be moderating today's session. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chirino. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. As Dr. Chirino said, my name is Emily Karam with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. The Chicago School of Professional Psychology is thrilled to join the International Association of University Presidents in making the world a better place through higher education. And as many of you know, Dr. Nealon has been relentless in her pursuit to this end, especially post-pandemic, where she has been working with colleagues and presidents around the world to address the mental health crisis. Today, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Nealon, who will discuss meeting the escalating demand for mental health services and how universities and colleges can shape the workforce to that end. Dr. Nealon, welcome and thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so very much, Emily. And hello to all of you, wherever you're joining us today across the globe. Thank you for joining me today for the second session on the current state of mental health care. In our first session, and I hope you had an opportunity to either participate or to join virtually by watching the video, I discussed the crisis of student mental health across the globe, outlining the struggles that our students face and some of the ways that we can address this crisis to cultivate student wellness. So today, I'm going to zoom out a bit farther to take a look at the state of our mental health system at large. As you'll see, all members of our communities face similar challenges to those that students face. And as higher education leaders, we have the unique opportunity and the unique expertise needed to shape our mental health care workforce in ways that address the field's most pressing challenges. So I'll start today by laying a foundational understanding of our current mental health crisis, shining a spotlight on our community's most pressing mental health challenges. From there, I'll branch off into conversations about the ways higher education can address our system's two most prominent issues. First, the need to grow the size of our overall mental health care workforce. And second, the need to diversify our mental health workforce. Similar to the last session, I'll then save time for open questions and answers before we close. So with that, let's dive in deeper. Before we explore ways to fix our mental health workforce issues, we first need to understand the crisis facing those in need. As I discussed the last time that we met, these crises are complex and multifaceted. But in short, our communities are struggling with growing mental health challenges, and our mental health care workforce is not big enough or diverse enough to provide the support that our struggling community members need. So in this section, I'll explain a bit more about the challenges our communities face and how our current systems of mental health care are inadequately equipped and have been for quite some time to provide the mental health care that communities desperately need. Broadly speaking, members of our communities of all ages and backgrounds are struggling with their mental health. For example, While just 10% of adults reported symptoms of anxiety and depression in 2019, 2021 data showed that 40% of adults reported these symptoms. Furthermore, while 29% of psychologists saw an increase in patients in 2020, 43% saw an increase in 2021. I could go on and provide more and more similar data points, but I trust that you understand the stark reality that we are facing across the globe today. Those around us are struggling, and struggling at a much higher rate than we've seen in recent years. Throughout the pandemic, plenty of attention has been paid to our community's physical health, and with good reason. But as these statistics show, we find ourselves in a mental health pandemic as well. And as I've learned as a mental health professional myself, there is no health without mental health. And so we need to address physical and mental health in equal measure to ensure holistic wellness for our communities. As I discussed in our last session, our youth have not been immune from these urgent mental health challenges either. We talked through last time the statistics, but I want to re-highlight them today to remind you of the urgency of the crisis facing our students, and also to provide this context for those of you who may not have been able to join us the last time. In one example of this crisis, in 2020, there was a 24% increase in mental health-related emergency room visits for 5 to 11-year-olds, and a 31% increase for 12 to 17-year-olds. In addition, suicide is now the second leading cause of death for people ages 20 to 24. And since the start of the pandemic, we have seen a 50% increase in suicide attempts among young girls and a 4% increase for boys. Further, even if young people do not have a formal diagnosis of a mental illness, they still may experience symptoms harmful to their overall wellness. According to data published by the CDC, roughly 4 out of 10 teenagers report persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Mental health challenges are also extremely common amongst college students. So for instance, over 70% of college students experience a mental health crisis while in college. About 4 in 10 college students suffer from depression, and 3 in 10 suffer from anxiety. As we discussed in our last session, all of these various data points demonstrate the same reality, that our students are mired in the same mental health crisis as their parents, their coaches, and their teachers. Students of all ages have struggled in a pandemic-defined environment full of isolation, disrupted routines, and stress about the health of their family and friends. While the protections put in place to keep students safe from COVID have, of course, been valuable, we do need to acknowledge and address the mental health costs of these actions and address student mental health challenges swiftly to ensure that these challenges don't balloon any farther into lifetime issues. So as you can see, our communities are struggling with a whole host of mental health challenges, from depression to anxiety and beyond. Community members of all ages and backgrounds must contend with growing rates of mental health challenges. Unfortunately, as a mental health leader, I see every day how our current system of mental health care is not equipped to provide adequate support to these communities in need. Our providers are inundated with demand for care and cannot reasonably support everyone who needs help. For instance, more than 1 out of every 3 Americans live in what's designated as a mental health professional shortage area. That is a region with fewer mental health providers than required by the size of the local population. And according to recent survey data, 41% of surveyed psychologists stated that they could not meet all demonstrated patient needs. Our existing network of mental health care providers have worked tirelessly over the course of their careers to provide communities with necessary mental health support. But they cannot solve every problem with their current resources. We owe it to the heroes of our mental health care workforce to supplement the field with reinforcements who can shoulder more of the responsibility of sustaining community wellness. In short, our mental health workforce simply lacks the number of providers it needs to meet all community healthcare needs. As demand for mental health care continues to rise day by day, this crisis of lack of providers only intensifies and will continue to do so. And we certainly see this overmatched, understaffed system at the school level as well, as we've discussed in our last sessions, and I know as university leaders across the globe that you're experiencing every day. While experts recommend a ratio of 1 school psychologist for every 50 students, current shortages suggest school communities actually see a ratio closer to 1 school psychologist for every 1,200 students. Similarly, college and university students also lack enough providers to meet their deep and diverse mental health care needs. For bigger schools, there is on average only 1 mental health counselor for every 3,000 students, 1 to every 3,000 students, leading to difficulty getting appointments and receiving consistent care in times of needs. As a result of these shortages in providers, students must wait longer than they should to get the mental health care support that they need, resulting in the very real possibility that these mental health challenges only get worse as students sit and wait. And this is really the best case scenario, as many other students wait and wait and wait for care and never get to meet with a counselor at all before they have to transfer schools or before they graduate. Furthermore, this lack of care is often even more dramatic for students from traditionally underserved backgrounds. While about 4 out of every 10 students overall lack necessary mental health support, about half of all Black and Latinx students lack necessary mental health care. In other words, even though all students need mental health care systems that work better for them, students of color experience even starker gaps in care. This all adds up to an environment where many students slip through the cracks amid urgent mental health struggles and crises. Clearly, we need to increase the number of providers available not only to the general population, but for our college and university students as well. As I had said, unfortunately, this shortage of mental health support has been felt even more severely in traditionally underserved communities here in the United States and across the globe, such as communities of color. Among those with mental health support needs, just 25% of African Americans and just 22% of Latinos here in the United States access the care that they need, compared to 38% of whites. The structural racism that pervades our institutions makes it difficult for people of color to access the care that they need. These barriers can include cost, transportation, and availability of local healthcare support networks. And then even if members of historically underserved communities can find an available mental health professional, odds are that the professional won't come from the same background as those most in need. According to American psychological data, for example, only 14% of psychologists are practitioners of color. So in other words, people of color not only face an uneven playing field in accessing care at all, but also in accessing care from providers who intricately understand their lived experiences and the support that they need. And community members themselves feel and understand these inequalities in care. For example, survey data show that 15% of African Americans believe that they would receive better health care if they were members of a different ethnic or racial group, compared to just 1% of whites. Similarly, within our school-based mental health care systems, mental health care providers tend not to reflect the diverse backgrounds of the students that they serve. For example, college campuses tend to lack providers of color or providers who understand the nuances of the LGBTQIA+ mental health needs. Overall, this diminishes the quality of care for students from traditionally underserved backgrounds, further exacerbating mental health challenges facing students today. To underscore the importance of providers reflecting the backgrounds of those they serve, let's imagine that Diana is a young Black woman with anxiety and depression, driven by recent microaggressions at work, but the only psychologist that she can find with open appointments is an older white man. In her first appointment, Diana tries to explain why these microaggressions cut so deeply, but she can't find the exact words to express herself. While her psychologist may be perfectly qualified and skilled as a healthcare provider, he cannot understand the unspoken pain that Diana carries as a target of workplace microaggressions as effectively as a young Black female counselor might. By tapping into the unspoken understanding between people who share a common background, Diana would gain a great deal by working with a young Black female provider. However, as we just discussed, it may be nearly impossible for Diana to find a young Black female provider in her community. Thus, it's important that we diversify our mental health workforce to ensure that everyone in need of care can access help from providers who deeply understand the lived experience that they bring into the counseling office. These providers offer a safe space to be mentally and emotionally vulnerable and to address pressing mental health challenges. In short, it's clear to see that our communities are struggling and that our systems of mental health care are not set up to provide the support that our communities so urgently need. While our collective mental health needs have skyrocketed in recent years amid so much pandemic-fueled isolation and uncertainty, the number of mental health providers in this field has not increased proportionally domestically in the United States or globally. This leaves us with too few providers trying their best, but simply unable to meet the heightened demand for their help. To respond, we have to increase the size of the workforce so that everyone in need has access to care and support. Nobody should fall through the cracks in our system, waiting endlessly for an elusive appointment with a local counselor. In addition, we can't just increase the number of available counselors, therapists, and psychologists, and other mental health professionals blindly. We need to ensure that these practitioners reflect the needs of today's communities. Namely, these providers have to reflect the demographic backgrounds of those they are entrusted to serve. We have to recruit, train, and support those who will help make our mental health workforce just as diverse as the communities that they support. Through both growth in the workforce and diversification of the workforce, we can bridge the gaps that currently exist between struggling communities and holistic wellness. So first, as I've discussed, we just need more providers. As we've learned already, the demand far outpaces the supply of available providers. Even in simple economic terms, you can start to see the crunch we all experienced when capacity can't keep up with demand. In this environment, mental health support becomes harder to access and more expensive to access. In response, we in higher education have a responsibility to increase the number of skilled providers so that we can start to correct for this capacity and demand imbalance. By increasing the size of the mental health workforce and by increasing the number of community members that each provider can support, we can lead in ensuring that everyone has access to the care that's needed. One huge reason that students do not pursue careers in mental health support is that, similar to other specialized careers, training and education can be prohibitively expensive. Students may have a passion for a career in mental health, but simply cannot afford the costs associated with the training programs. To make a big difference for prospective students, we as college and university leaders need to offer robust financial aid programs for students pursuing careers in our high-need mental health care fields. Ideally, this financial assistance should come in the form of grants and scholarships instead of loans to ensure that students are not financially burdened by their pursuit of higher education later on in life. Further, these financial support programs should at times be more targeted in order to address our most pressing workforce shortages. For instance, as I've already highlighted here today, traditionally underserved communities often face the greatest shortages of mental health care professionals. Since roles in these under-resourced communities may pay less than roles in higher income communities, graduates may tend to steer away from work in these highest needed areas. However, as college and university leaders, we have the power to make a difference here. Rather than having community income dictate the availability of care, we can incentivize taking on roles in underserved communities by providing financial benefits for students who choose to take on these high-need roles. Specifically, college and university leaders can develop financial aid programs that provide financial support to students who take on those roles in our highest needed communities. Students can then complete their professional training at a more accessible price point and can support those most in need of support. While students may not gravitate towards these types of jobs on their own, we as leaders can develop systems of support and incentives that demonstrate how much we value this type of work. In addition, to increase financial accessibility of training programs, and in turn, to increase the size of our mental health care workforce, we can certainly do more to develop innovative, affordable programming that does not sacrifice educational quality. So, for instance, we can increase our investment in accelerated graduate degree programs. Accelerated programs help students enter their professional field of choice more quickly and at a lower price, since credits can be double counted towards undergraduate and graduate level requirements. In addition, we can also encourage growth in the healthcare workforce by supporting programs that reward credit for prior learning. by providing students with credit for either relevant classroom or professional experiences. We can fast track these students to graduation and into the workforce by recognizing the hard work that they've already put in as both students and professionals in their chosen fields. Instead of having students spend money on courses with content in which they've already demonstrated expertise, we can arrange for holistic assessments and exams that allow students to receive credit for all types of prior learning and experience. By structuring our training programs with an emphasis on rewarding prior learning, we can minimize financial barriers for interested and experienced students and help students get into the fields where we need them the most. Similar types of competency-based programs also allow students to progress through training programs by demonstrating competency in key program concepts, rather than by completing specific courses. With this structure, students can progress through programs on their own schedule, fast-tracking their training whenever their schedules allow and scaling back on their training whenever life is otherwise too busy. We know that today's students respond exceptionally well to these types of flexible learning opportunities, so we can use this type of programmatic flexibility to recruit more students into high-demand mental health-related training programs. And lastly, we can also make thoughtful investments into stackable, credentialed-focused programming. In stackable programs, students can combine several similar scale programs, such as certificates, to build into larger scale credentials, such as master's degrees. With a stackable approach, we can provide students with the flexibility that they want, while still allowing them to demonstrate their professional readiness along the way with smaller scale certificates. So let's take a quick look at an example of the benefit of stackable credentials. Let's say that we have a prospective student, Alice, who is currently working as a teacher, but who wants to pursue a career as a mental health counselor. She's passionate about the possibility of working in counseling and was a high achiever in her undergraduate programming, but unfortunately, she doesn't have either the time or the money right now to take on a full master's degree program in counseling. Without innovative stackable programs in place, these obstacles of time and money will prevent Alice from pursuing a career in mental health care altogether. However, we can see a very different outcome if stackable programs become available to her. Instead of needing to spend the time and money to take on a multi-year, expensive master's degree program, she can take on a shorter, cheaper certificate program in the counseling-related discipline. Then she can use this credential to obtain a matched job in a counseling-related role that gains her valuable workforce experience while not allowing her step out the boundaries of her competence. Later, once she's saved up for additional funds and has much more time available, she can return to school for another certificate program that builds upon the content that she learned in the first program. In addition, since these two certificate programs are designed to be stackable, she can combine the credits earned within both programs alongside a capstone project to earn the master's degree that she's always wanted. Thus, even if she doesn't have the time or the money to pursue a full master's degree all at once while stepping away from her full-time job as a teacher, she can piece together smaller scale programs to invest in her educational and professional goals over time. In short, these types of stackable programs make mental health care careers more accessible for more people, helping us to grow our overall workforce more quickly than we could by only offering traditionally structured programs. Supporting these types of flexible, innovative programs will help us address the shortages of healthcare professionals that I've discussed today and that we all know are out there facing us across the globe. As college and university leaders, we even have the opportunity to shape the future of mental health programming globally. We can partner together in the stackability of our programs and come together for the first time in history and partner in creating a new way forward. In addition, to support growth of student-facing mental health care systems in particular, we can provide training programs to stakeholders who can offer support in instances where schools, colleges, and universities cannot afford to hire full-time counselors, social workers, therapists, or psychologists. For example, colleges and universities can develop and market training programs that show teachers, professors, and other school-based staff members how to recognize warning signs of student-specific mental health challenges and how to provide base-level support to these students in need. With this type of training and baseline support, colleges and universities can help address students' mental health needs more proactively. This, in turn, helps to minimize the strain on providers who are currently overwhelmed with student needs that have intensified over time. At the post-secondary level, leaders can also provide training for peer counselors, students who can offer baseline mental health support to other students in need. These peer counselors are a low-cost, high-access way to support struggling students. Students in need can access peer counselors outside of therapists' traditional working hours, and students may find speaking with a peer psychologically safer than discussing their concerns with a full-time counselor. Of course, peer counselors may not be able to address every mental health concern and may not be the right answer for every student in need, but they do offer an impactful supplement to a broader system of mental health care. In addition, colleges and universities can help school systems of all levels develop student-facing mental health education programs. For example, primary and secondary school systems typically offer some type of health education programming, but these courses tend to focus more on physical health than on mental health. To supplement this programming, colleges and universities should develop robust long-term mental health education programs that help participants break down stigmas, blocking students from seeking mental health support, help them understand warning signs in both themselves and their peers, and show them where to turn for help in times of need. Through these robust training programs, educators can help students become stronger advocates for their own mental health needs. With these types of programs in place, colleges and universities can help bridge gaps in care for the short run while we simultaneously train the next generation of mental health change makers who will support our communities over the long run. Even in instances where we are unable to expand the actual number of providers in a given community, we can nonetheless expand access to care by investing in telehealth training for our mental health care students. As we've seen over the past few pandemic-defined years, telemedicine offers an immensely valuable way for us to expand access to care for those in need. With telehealth options in place, a provider does not need to be in their local community in order to support you. In other words, even if your neighborhood lacks adequate mental health care, you can leverage telehealth therapy services to connect with a therapist located elsewhere. By making telehealth skill building a bigger part of our mental health training programs, we can ensure that more providers can offer this valuable access expanding services to those in need. Telehealth services functionally expand the size of mental health care support networks without formally hiring or training a larger number of practitioners. Instead, telehealth simply expands the number of communities that a given provider can support. Of course, telehealth services are less impactful for those providers who are already inundated with local needs, but it can, and it has, made a real difference in certain instances where providers may not have a full caseload throughout their community. Telehealth is a critical part of evolving our ecosystem of mental health care support systems across the globe. However, it is conceptually similar to the approaches discussed earlier of training supplementary providers. Telehealth will not address all of our challenges for good, but it will offer a short-term remedy for our largest gaps in care. So overall, as you can hopefully see, while we have so many options to expand the networks of care available to those in need, what's really important to remember is that we need to invest in financial accessibility and in program flexibility in order to ensure that more students can pursue a professional future in the high-demand mental health care field. And to supplement these accessibility and workforce growth initiatives before they can fully take effect, we can take steps to increase access to valuable care in the meantime. With telehealth services and training for supplementary providers such as classroom teachers and peer counselors, we can provide access to care while we grow more sustainable networks of fully trained counselors, therapists, social workers, psychologists, and other mental health care providers. As a mental health care professional myself, I expect that we will continue to see rising needs for mental health care support. It's not going to stop. It will just continue to worsen. And as an educator, I know that our colleges and universities have not only the ability, but the social responsibility to help grow our mental health care workforce to meet these rising needs. And second, as I discussed earlier, our current mental health support system not only lacks the number of overall providers that it needs, it also tragically lacks the necessary level of diversity. While our communities continue to quickly diversify, our systems of mental health care are not diversifying at a similar rate. We simply need to diversify networks of providers to ensure that everyone, regardless of their personal background, can access mental health care from someone who deeply understands and respects the nuances of their unique lived experience. So first, investment in providers from underserved backgrounds needs to begin far before they ever submit a university application or arrive on our campuses. Higher education leaders need to invest in long-term pipelines that support traditionally underserved student populations at every point of their educational journey, from elementary school through graduate level coursework. Today, by the time they reach the college level, because of underfunded primary and secondary school systems, students from traditionally underserved backgrounds may lack the educational or real-world experience to succeed in college level and graduate level healthcare programming. However, by partnering with schools and students right from the start, we together can ensure that students are set up for success when they reach the post-secondary level. Through these partnerships, we can also cultivate lasting interest in and demonstrate access to careers in mental health care. Through early start programming like career shadowing days, mentorship opportunities, and internship networks, colleges and universities can show students from traditionally underserved backgrounds that careers in mental health care are accessible to them. Too often, students from traditionally underserved backgrounds believe that some doors are simply not going to open for them. As educators, I believe that we owe it to students everywhere to open all doors. Once students reach the post-secondary level, we need to support them through undergraduate and graduate level programs as well. As we discussed earlier together, offering financial support for students who pursue career options in traditionally underserved communities is a highly valuable strategy. But to ensure that everyone has access to care from those who innately understand their unique lived experience, we need to provide specialized financial support to students directly from these traditionally underserved communities also. Even though these prospective students would be exceptionally valuable members of the mental health care workforce, they may lack the financial resources to afford training programs that prepare them for careers in mental health care. For instance, while post-secondary costs have risen substantially for all students in recent years, these rising costs have had the largest impacts, as I mentioned, on communities of color. According to recent data, while average net price of an education at a four-year public institution accounted for 25% or more of median household income for white households in 15 US states, it accounted for 25% or more of median household income for Black households in 36 states, and in 36 states for Latinx households. Clearly, higher education can be prohibitively expensive for students of all racial backgrounds, but it's most often a significant financial stress for students from households of color. In other words, the steep price of higher education today makes it incredibly difficult for so many students of color to pursue their educational and professional goals, depriving the mental health care field of so many thoughtful, skilled practitioners who simply cannot afford the training that they need. In response, higher educational leaders such as us should develop targeted financial assistance programs that support students from traditionally underserved communities. Through specialized grant and scholarship programs directed at students from traditionally underserved communities, colleges and universities can increase financial accessibility for these students and can help these students diversify the workforce at large. Now, in addition, once students from traditionally underserved backgrounds arrive on campus, they may still be at an academic and professional disadvantage compared to their more privileged peers. And that's even with strong primary level and secondary level programming like what we discussed a moment ago. To address this concern and prepare these students for success as key members of a diversifying mental health workforce, we need to provide these students with specialized support systems to bridge the persistent opportunity gap. These programs can look similar to the programming I described for the primary level and secondary level pipelines. For example, college and university leaders can offer professional networking opportunities, resume and cover letter review services, and mentorship programs. These various opportunities will help students from traditionally underserved backgrounds navigate the transition to post-secondary education and secure high-quality post-training employment. While this type of programming is valuable for all of our students, it is even more important for students who may arrive on campus without professional resources equal to those of their more privileged peers. Without robust targeted programming, Colleges and universities can ensure that we not only recruit diverse students, but that we bridge opportunity gaps and support these students all the way to achieving their professional goals. In the short term, while we work to diversify our mental health workforce, we need to ensure that all providers have the cultural competency skills needed to support community members from backgrounds different from their own. These cultural competency skills will also prove beneficial in the long run, as no provider will only support those from a single cultural and demographic background. Providers will always need to understand those who are different from themselves. To prioritize the development of these cultural competency skills, we can bake in cultural competency courses and modules into our mental health care training programs. Equipped with this training, our providers can provide more thoughtful care to those in need. So, for example, let's imagine that Sam is a psychologist with clients representing a diverse array of cultures. In an appointment, a client opens up to Sam about family-related stressors. Without adequate training and preparation, Sam may not fully understand how to ask the right questions to better understand the client's unique cultural background and how that background may be impacting their mental health challenges. However, with the sufficient cultural competency training, Sam can work with his client to ask the questions needed to determine how the client's unique cultural background may influence both his stressors and how he wants to address these stressors. Importantly, this type of training is not a license to stereotype clients or their needs based on their background. Instead, cultural competency training provides frameworks through which providers can work with clients to contextualize their mental health concerns and needs within the ecosystem of their backgrounds and their communities. We need to invest in providing this type of training so that regardless of personal background, providers can support our ever diversifying communities. Lastly, as we have already discussed, telehealth services are incredibly valuable in increasing mental health care support for those in need, connecting people with counselors and therapists and psychologists when there might not be any located nearby. Training providers in how to leverage these types of services can also prove beneficial in increasing access to diverse providers. Even if your local area, for example, does not have any providers of color or LGBTQIA+ providers, with the help of telehealth services, you can connect with a non-local provider who shares your personal background. Of course, this is not a full substitute for diversifying the mental health workforce in all local communities. While many people may not mind virtual counseling appointments, others may not have the right technology at home to facilitate these appointments and/or may feel more comfortable discussing their mental health in person. Still, as a stopgap measure, while we work to diversify and grow the workforce, increasing access to telehealth services can only help to increase access to providers from more diverse backgrounds. Overall, the need to diversify our mental health workforce is clearer than ever. While our communities continue to diversify, community members often cannot get care from people, as I had said, who share their unique backgrounds. To address this most pressing challenge, we have plenty of policy options, as I've outlined here. The crux of all these proposals, though, is that we need to provide specialized support to students from traditionally underserved backgrounds all throughout their educational careers to ensure that we bridge systemic accessibility and opportunity gaps and provide full access to mental health care training for all. through initiatives such as long-term mentorship programs and targeted financial support, we all can ensure that students of all backgrounds can help diversify the mental health care field. In the meantime, it's also meaningful for us to pursue short-term answers, such as increased investment in cultural competency programming and in telehealth services. Through both short-term and long-term fixes, I know that we'll come together, diversify our networks of care, and provide more understanding support to those most in need. Thank you for listening to my comments. And now I'd like to provide space for open Q&A, and feel free to ask any question from today's session. You can type your question into the chat or unmute and ask your question live. And Emily is going to help moderate the Q&A. So I'll turn it over to you, please, Emily.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nealon. It's so interesting. I think you had a few questions pop up in the chat, and then, of course, as you tend to do later on in the presentation, those got answered. But I do have a few that we'll start with. And as Dr. Nealon said, as your questions come up, feel free to jot them in the chat or raise your virtual hand in our Zoom room, and we'll figure out a way to get you unmuted. So first one here, you mentioned stackable credentials. Can you address if and how those can be offered virtually as the potential to be a more attainable solution for students looking to become mental health professionals? And then with that, discuss perhaps the alternative financial structure that such virtual stackable credentials could offer.
Well, to the first point, and I will certainly, I know that we have participants all over the globe, and I will first of all say that every country, of course, has its individual regulations and licensure or credentialing requirements that oversee the counseling and the psychology professions. So I certainly am familiar with that in the United States, and of course, not as familiar with that outside of the United States. Any conversation that we have together about counseling, master's and doctoral level degrees, whether they are the traditional master's and doctoral degrees, or whether we begin to innovate in this stackable degree format, it is always important to develop them in compliance with the local accreditation and regulatory credentialing and licensing expectations and requirements. But that said, I truly believe that at times when domestically and globally, we have a responsibility to evolve. As college and university leaders, we bring forward the innovative potentials, and then we work with our accreditors and our regulators in order to present the case while focusing on quality at all times. So with that said, you know, the notion here is, as I'd mentioned, for an increasing number of students, stepping away to come in for 2 and 3 and 5-year programs, training programs in counseling and psychology, it's becoming increasingly difficult. The pandemic certainly was a game changer for all of us in higher education and beyond. We saw that programs that were once believed to only be best provided with students traditionally in a classroom with their professor. All of this has been shaken up. And certainly in the professions that we represent at the Chicago School, we do recognize some content can be delivered in the traditional classroom, in a hybrid format, and also in a fully remote online format, and with quality. And yet in some areas, it's absolutely necessary for skills-based acquisition to be in the classroom with the professor learning in person. But it doesn't have to be one or either anymore. Certificate programs, stackable credentialed programs that lead towards master's and doctoral degrees can be taught in the online format. We now know that. We've developed that competency in that regard. We can do that individually. We can do that with partnerships with other universities. We can do that domestically, individually, domestically with partnerships with universities. And I would certainly challenge us that we can begin to do that globally. Where there is a will, there is an absolute way. We now know, we at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology have international students in our programs from over 30 different countries, and we are training and supporting them admirably. We can do it, we can all do it in this continued new way of delivering our educational programs. Regarding the finances of students, I believe fully that certainly here in the United States, and again, really each college and university leader is unique depending on where they are leading, what country they are leading in. But certainly we need to be putting increased responsibility at the state and the federal level, for example, in the United States, where mental health is not only prioritized from a service perspective, but from a workforce development perspective. I fundamentally believe, just as we have done to support enrollment in STEM disciplines in the medical profession, that we begin to hold our state and our federal representatives responsible for funding the next generation of mental health care providers. There simply needs to be more access to grants and scholarship funding. There simply needs to be more access to loan forgiveness, for example, when our graduates begin to work in the mental health professions in rural areas with nonprofits and so on. That is one of the ways that we are trying to really better fund our students. As a university, we actually distribute millions of dollars every year to scholarship our students. And in the pandemic, we were able to actually forgive the loans that our students had, really in very sizable amounts. And it significantly contributed to the retention and the persistence of our students. One of the data points that I am the most proud of was that through that financial support, with the motivation to keep our students enrolled during the most stressful period of their time, we saw unprecedented increases in retention, but double-digit increase year over year in the retention of our students of color. And what that sort of data point from the Chicago School alone tells us, with the right financial support, our students will persist onwards towards their degree in the mental health care field. The Chicago School is very proudly a majority minority university. So we are really leading in training the next generation of diverse mental health professionals. And so I am not suggesting anything that we ourselves are not practicing, and the results are really clear. I can't give a definitive answer to the finances because I know that it is so different for every country, every college and university leader listening in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nealon. Just as a comment, I've seen firsthand what you're referencing in the faculty's ability to bring to life the trainings via Zoom and other online learning platforms in the classroom and bring that virtual environment to what I've kind of gathered to say is not better or worse, but very different and equally as enriching. So that's been really interesting to watch and see specifically how the Chicago School of Professional Psychology faculty have been doing it. And speaking of faculty, the next question is, how do you work with faculty to talk about mental health? Are they the front line encouraging students to seek help? What is their role? What is the college president's role in addressing faculty?
Well, I certainly recognize that at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, we are quite a niche group of professionals. So as the president, I myself am a clinical psychologist. We now have over 30 degree programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. And of course, as a result of that, all of our faculty are doctoral level faculty. So we are every day with our counseling faculty, our clinical psychology faculty, and so on. So we certainly talk about mental health all the time, our employees, and most certainly our students, as well as those in the communities. We have 7 campuses in 7 different metropolitan locations in the United States. So in lots of different areas. But we really go above and beyond that. So at the Chicago School, we partner with CompPsych, and they are an entity that provides free of charge for all of our employees and all of our students access to mental health care support, but additionally legal advice, financial advice, and so on. So there is not one of our students and not one of our employees that does not have access to this assistance program. And we know, we of course, at the aggregate level, we're able to see the number of our employees and our students that access this fantastic service, and it truly is well used. We also do on a regular basis, of course, in the professional part of the training with our counseling students and with our doctoral students. Our faculty mentor them all the time about the importance of their own self-care, their own mental health strength and well-being as they are preparing for careers in supporting the mental health care of others.
Thank you, Dr. Nealon, and thank you everyone for your questions. I have one more here that we'll plan to end with unless another pops up. Another really good one. You mentioned training programs to supplement that somewhat offset ratio right now of practitioners to students. Is there a centralized source for such programs that college presidents can tap into? And if so, are there specific ones that you recommend in order to supplement the need for mental health professionals, while of course we work on increasing that number through the other avenues that you addressed?
Well, there certainly is one that is quite accessible. Many of our faculty are actually trained in providing this training both internally as well as for other organizations, and it's called Mental Health First Aid Training. And that is a very robust, very well thought of training that can help anyone that participates in the training to recognize the signs of mental health issues and distress, as well as mental health crises and emergencies, and then also provides training on what an individual might be able to do in terms of a referral or in terms of access to a support system or to emergency services. So is that it really is a training about how can you watch out for and take care of the people that are around you, regardless of who they are, colleagues, people for whom you are responsible, students, etc. We have provided that training in school systems, in university systems, in the non-higher education sector, and there's a lot of evidence-based research to support that sort of mental health first aid training is very effective, regardless of the setting or the group of employees that participate in the training.
Such a poignant name and also a poignant experience. I've seen that program in action as well. And it's, gosh, as you said at the outset, as critical as being able to put a Band-Aid on a child. So that's just wonderful. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Nealon, for addressing this very critical situation so eloquently. I think that if there's anyone in the world who can be the expert on helping our colleges and universities understand their role in addressing the mental health crisis, pre, during, and post-pandemic, if that's ever going to be such a thing, it's certainly you. And you have been doing your part out there globally to ensure that that message is being heard, and you can really see the effects of that. And I know your colleagues and students are very grateful for that as well. So with that, if there are no additional questions, I will then pass the podium back to Dr. Chirino to close us out for the day.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this very, very interesting conversation. We thank the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, particularly Dr. Michele Nealon, for this very enlightening conversation about mental health. We sometimes do not quite understand the importance of these issues. Me, myself, as a father of a 20-year-old girl, I am very surprised to see all the data, the statistics you shared with us. And I truly appreciate the help and your support, the one you have provided to everybody through these conversations, and also through the hard work you do at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I want to close this session on behalf of the International Association of University Presidents, reminding you that we have one more session in September. This is scheduled to begin at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Daytime on September the 6th, 2022. We hope to see each other over here, and we are going to close this first series of seminars with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and we will have also the participation of another person, Chancellor Peck from the National Trent University, and Vice President of IAUP for Europe. We will be very happy to see you all there. And thank you again, Dr. Nealon, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.